Hi, folks. I apologize for the poor lighting again. If you followed my videos before, you know I've had these issues. This is very low tech. Anyway, if you're in the learning community, this is a bonus lecture, as it were, because well, for one, this is technically your reading days, quote unquote, and we aren't supposed to assign any new material, even in the whole COVID situation. But I wanted to take some time to go over a couple of ideas that I've just been thinking about, and actually been thinking about for a while. But it's kind of appropriate to what you all have been discussing and thinking about with Dr. Briscoe's class. And so I wanted to talk about the similarities between the 1977 films Star Wars: A New Hope and Smokey and the Bandit. And my contention is that essentially they have the same plot. And I'm going to talk about the implications thereof in terms of what it meant for a 1970s slash 80s America, and really what that revealed to us about what it that possibly could reveal to us about the American psyche, at least going into the last couple of decades of the 20th century, and then kind of how that still is with us in a couple of different ways. But first of all, let me point out the parallels. Okay, first of all, essentially, right? Han Solo is a space trucker. He's a smuggler, and he smuggles stuff just like the Bandit and Cletus. Essentially, they smuggle stuff. They're truck illegal cargo across the United States and such, right? And clearly, Han Solo and the Bandit, they're the same type of archetype, the scoundrel archetype, right? In fact, in one of the one of the early scenes in Smokey and the Bandit, Frog, aka Sally Field, right? She asks the Bandit what he does, and he says, "Show off," right? That's what he does, and that's what Han Solo does, also, right? That's his MO, and you can't get more quintessentially, say, post-Vietnam American than the show-off archetype, right? If you look at the people that we revere in our society, even the people that we elevate to power, right? Those that are enduring, right, in one way or other, they kind of embody this. I mean, if you look, for instance, and I'm going to lose some people here. Some people are not going to agree with this statement, but this is my take on it. But if you look at Bill Clinton, for example, and you look at how much African Americans tend to revere Bill Clinton, because he played the saxophone, and he was well versed. He was an aficionado of blues music and so on and so forth, and so much to the point that Alice Walker referred to Bill Clinton as the first black president, because he essentially beat the odds and beat the system, and he started out a poor kid from Hope, Arkansas, became president of the United States. But and so there's that show off myth, right? That of Bill Clinton and a certain type of masculinity, right? However, if you look at Clinton's record in working with the African American community and his effects on the African American community, he probably did more damage to the African American community than any president in recent history. Given his 1994 crime bill, which in effect imprisoned pretty much a generation of young African American males, primarily for minor drug charges, mostly, right? So, but there's this myth. I mean, and I'm talking about myth with the capital M. This sort of prevailing story, right, in which people have infused a great deal of power, that the Clintons are these kinds of white knights, if you will, quote unquote, right? Which is why, you had Cornel West and other black elites who supported Hillary Clinton over Obama, right? And even if you look at in Obama, for most of his presidency was criticized for not being black enough, ironically. But even if you look at, for instance, Donald Trump and people who revere Donald Trump, one cannot argue that Trump is not a show-off if he's nothing else, right? I'm not talking about his qualification to be president or anything of that nature, but he is a show-off, and he's kind of a lightning rod for people who really look for that kind of thing. Why? Because honestly, as in the lyrics to one of the songs in the first Smokey and the Bandit movie, the song talks about how people, despise the bandit, but secretly they want to be the bandit. Secretly, people want to be Donald Trump. People want to be Bill Clinton, right? They want that kind of power. They want the ability to get away with the things that both Bill Clinton and Donald Trump have gotten away with. I mean, Donald Trump has gotten away with egregious, horrible things. And I mean, this is a matter of record. I'm not even talking about his presidential record. I'm talking about before he was president, right? The reason that there are domestic violence laws, the reason there are a domestic partner, i.e. a marriage, I'm sorry, the reason that it is illegal in the state of New York to rape one's wife or rape one's spouse is because of Donald Trump, because Donald Trump got off on that, because when he was brought to trial about it, it was not illegal. And so, but this is all documented. What Mr. Trump did to his first wife is entirely documented, and it's horrible. But it was not illegal at the time. Okay, so but again, people see the quote unquote show off, and they want to be able to get away with that. But Star Wars and Smokey and the Bandit, they go a step further, because it becomes the narrative becomes the redemption, right, of the show off. In both cases, you have sort of this power of love, potency of love that redeems the show off character. With Han Solo, and it's Han Solo and Princess Leia's relationship that you see kind of redeems him and elevates him, right, to an heroic character. Incidentally, if you'd never seen the original cut of Star Wars, the one that aired in theaters, the hardness of Han Solo is shown in the first scene in which he's introduced when he and Greedo are at the table. Greedo does not shoot in the original scene. Han Solo just kills him. And that's a scene actually that's taken out of The Good, Bad, and the Ugly. As my friend Richard Ingram pointed out, that's directly out of The Good, Bad, and the Ugly. But in the '97 sort of reboot versions, or however you want to classify those, when George Lucas went in and sort of re-edited the movies, they put Greedo in as firing and Han Solo in as firing, so you get a softer Han Solo at that point. But originally, he's got some hardness to him, and he becomes, it's not Skywalker, but it's Han Solo who's the sort of American, quintessential American figure, because you're looking at an America, that had come out of Vietnam, that had come out of Watergate, and really looking for something to hold on to, something to really have esteem about, right? And ultimately, these heroic figures of the Han Solo and the Bandit, right? The thing that America grabs onto is this notion of being, bigger than life and so on. And indeed, the 1977, the cultural backdrop is something like Studio 54, which is basically the Mos Eisley Cantina, writ large, in reality, in real life. And even Michael Jackson, who as we all know now, was not interested in the sort of adult sexuality that was occurring at Studio 54, but he would go there for the energy and the artistry and so forth. And he actually, in his song "Don't Stop Till You Get Enough," the intro to that song talks about the forest and how it has a lot of power and so on. So that's a direct reference to Star Wars. And he comes up with that song at the time of having seen that movie, and also, of experiencing the Studio 54. So that's kind of what's going on, culturally, is people reaching and trying to discover themselves and so on. But Han Solo is something that people grasp onto. So, also you've got there's a parallel between Darth Vader and Buford T. Justice, the sheriff. I mean, both are trying to bring order to the galaxy, as it were, in very conventional and outmoded ways, if you will, very toxic ways. The toxicity, I mean, we can look at. And I did as a child. I looked at Jackie Gleason as the sheriff, and at the time, I wasn't used to hearing F-bombs and things like that. So I thought it was funny, and all this. But the character, he's really a nasty character. He there's a scene again in the first film, in the Smokey and the Bandit film, where a black, an African American sheriff from Arkansas is kind of reluctantly helping him in his pursuit with the bandit, and the African American sheriff's car crashes, and the sheriff Justice comes up, and he refers to the sheriff who's in a car that's stuck in a lake. He refers to him as a racial slur and says, "Where is Sheriff so and so?" And the sheriff says, "I am the sheriff." And Buford T. Justice's response is, "You sounded much taller on the radio." Well, of course, and then he looks at his son and says, "What is the world coming to?" Well, a child's not going to get the context there, right? The child is not going to get the Buford T. Justice is a flat out racist. Well, if you look at Darth Vader, right, his whole motif is patterned after the Nazis, right? His helmet and so on and so forth. That's all, that's all patterned after Nazism. And of course, the big thing about the Empire, if you look at the Star Wars movies closely, the Empire is all about humans, right? They don't like creatures that are not human. They've got droids, but that's essentially it. They've got humans and human clones, and of course, they might hire a bounty hunter or two, but they don't put them on the same tier as humans. That's of course very reminiscent. That's racist, right? And reminiscent of Nazism. So there are those parallels there too, and sort of. Cletus Snow and Fred the dog are kind of an amalgam of Chewbacca, right? I mean, they kind of collectively become the Chewbacca. And there is a Luke Skywalker in the Smokey and the Bandit. He's kind of the whiny son of the sheriff, right? The whiny son of and Luke, Luke's a pretty whiny character. In fact, in fact. Well, he's not whiny compared to Hayden Christensen's portrayal of Anakin or Adam Driver's portrayal of Kylo Ren. Those are far more whiny characters than Luke. But in any case, the Skywalker family is hard for the sort of for most Americans to deal with. But Han Solo is more your everyman scoundrel character, so he's kind of more accessible in that way. But in any case, there are other parallels as well. Like for example, the rescuing of the princess, aka played by Sally Field in the Smokey and the Bandit. Interesting. This is an interesting synchronicity. Her character's name is Carrie, and of course, Carrie Fisher plays Princess Leia, as we all know. But one of the reasons that this is so appealing, right, to people is particularly Star Wars, follows the Joseph Campbell's monomyth to a T. I mean, George Lucas was a student of Campbell's, and in fact, Campbell was on set for Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. But and both Solo and Skywalker go through that, go through the monomythic cycle, go through this, the character's either having a dead-end life or an oblivious life, feels this call to adventure, rejects the call to adventure any number of times, and then goes through a series of trials and so on and so forth, to the point that ultimately the character discovers something else, something about himself or herself, such that the character is able to essentially transcends one world to another, then comes back and is able to navigate both worlds and so on, right? And you can see that, you see those motifs throughout the Star Wars trilogy. You can also see it throughout the Smokey and the Bandit trilogy. In fact, one would argue that the third Smokey and the Bandit, although Burt Reynolds doesn't participate at all except for the final scene, but one would argue that film, beyond the other two, really typifies the hero's journey, because in that film Cletus actually takes on the role of the bandit, becomes the hero, right? And really, that's what we want to do as audiences. Is that we want to undertake that journey, and in fact, we do undertake those journeys in our own lives. And anyone who is attending class successfully among COVID, right, is certainly undertaking a hero's journey and succeeding at that journey. So you all should be commended in that regard. But in any case, incidentally, in 1977, Star Wars made the most money. Smokey and the Bandit made the second most money that year. In fact, my ex-wife's wife, say that really fast, right? But she told me that she was a teenager then, and she went to see both of those movies multiple times that year, right? So and I think the reason that Smokey and the Bandit, that Star Wars is by far more revered and by far transcends, has gone far beyond a film into really a cultural phenomenon, across the world and so on, such that it was acquired by Disney. That's the hallmark of success, right? Is to be acquired by Disney, But anyway, the reason being is that, and Joseph Campbell, talks about this in The Power of Myth, that is its use of outer space and otherworldliness, because, as was stated in the intro to Star Trek, in the decade before Star Wars, space, the final frontier, right? In other words, we've explored, or at that time we thought that we'd explored all of Earth and so on and so forth, and so what's left to explore? Well, space, of course, right? And of course, the moon landing had occurred in '69, and so on. And so this is the trajectory that human beings had been looking to. And also, Star Wars dealt with another frontier, and that was the frontier of the mind and the spirit with the Force. And a lot of Yoda's dialogue actually comes directly out of the Bhagavad Gita. One of Yoda's most memorable, in my view, statements. Fear leads to anger, anger leads to hatred, and hatred leads to the dark side, right? That's basically, not verbatim, but pretty close to a statement in the Bhagavad Gita that Krishna tells Arjuna, So we're talking about very ancient and apropos philosophy, right? And of course there are elements of Bushido, elements of Zen, elements of Taoism in the Force. And in fact, I was attending a lecture on Sanatana Dharma several months ago, and someone asked, what is Dharma, right? And I said, well, and I didn't make this up. I got this from actually a very prominent scholar. I said, well, it's the Force. And the person asking the question was like, oh, okay, got it, understand. And actually, what for those of you that are interested, a working definition of Dharma is the essential quality of something, right? But anyway, and of course, interestingly, after the prequels, nobody talked about midichlorians anymore. That was the most unfortunate. That was the most unfortunate misstep on George Lucas's part, was the midichlorians, in my opinion. But in any case, and of course, George Lucas was drawing on so much. In fact, the plot in this sort of adds more credence to my point here, is that the plot of Star Wars, and hence Smokey and the Bandit, really it's basically the Ramayana. If you look at the Ramayana, the main plot thread, not the Ramayana is very intricate, but princess gets captured, rescue princess, so on and so forth. It's a very classic, very arguably intrinsic human experiential plot. That goes back time immemorial, So, but Campbell's notion, right, for those of you who are not familiar with Campbell, is that we're attracted to these stories. We're attracted to this essential mythic structure because we in our own lives go on these journeys ourselves. In one sense, every time you achieve a goal, whether it's turning in an assignment, a job goal, or anything of that nature, a relationship goal, whatever it may be, right? You're slaying a monster, if you will. Whether that monster be fear, learning a particular task, and so on and so forth, right? And so we're all, and as Campbell points out, we're all heroes within our own birth. The process of birth in and of itself is perilous, right? But the fact that we survive that is in and of itself heroic, right? So anyway, and of course you get notions of that. There's echoes of that in Mormon theology and other philosophical systems, right? But in any case, we see in these two iconic films, right, in these actually two iconic trilogies, the first Star Wars trilogy and the Smokey and the Bandit trilogy, we see really the working out of what of essentially America's search for self-esteem, you know, after Vietnam, after Watergate, and so on. Um, and arguably, you know, America as a whole just wants to try to forget a lot. You know, the sort of prevailing cultural uh, swath that we get in the 80s, you know, the only mention of Vietnam in 80s popular culture, well, I mean, you had like China Beach and such, but, you know, is like Chuck Norris and Sylvester Stallone blazing in to get POWs out, you know, but the more difficult questions, you know, behind Vietnam and so forth, that those really weren't necessarily dealt with. You know, Campbell, and as I, if you're in the learning community, you might have seen my post on the discussion board about this. You know, Campbell's discussion of heroism, and he uses Vietnam as an example of this, that the political implications of a war don't detract from the heroism of the individual who is in the battle, because the most of the time in an actual battle situation, the person is not necessarily fighting for any political reason per se. The person is essentially following orders, and also, and this is to Campbell's point, trying to keep alive, you know, those with whom he or she is fighting, you know, on their side. Forrest Gump comes to mind. You know, I gotta find Bubba, and you know, he runs back and he grabs his his buddies, you know, out of the line of fire and such. And you know, you can't get a more apolitical person than Forrest Gump. You know, he's the everyman. You know, kind of the, you know, and so on. But in America, we lost our way with that, with people who came back from Vietnam. You know, and they were essentially cast as not by everyone, but sort of broadly. Because there was so much ambivalence ultimately by the end of that conflict, that you know, they were cast as and they were just you know, just kind of left to their own devices, and you had so much drug use and so on and so forth. You had all kinds of stuff because society did not embrace them and embrace their experience, you know. And so you had films like Rambo, and you had films like, you know, Missing in Action and stuff like that, that were kind of escapist films for those people, you know, that, you know, kind of put a more positive bent, if you will, on what they did, or, you know, how potential POWs were still suffering and so forth. So but that's something to consider, that that politics does not necessarily detract from heroism, right? You know, keeping someone alive on a battlefield is heroic, period. You know, that's, and so hopefully we can continue to look at our soldiers in a more respectful and positive light, despite the politics surrounding, you know, why they may be fighting and so forth. Anyway, so, and again, you know, we're still embroiled with this this idea of the show off, you know. And it's and with it is a certain type of masculinity, because if you look in nature, right, which animals do you see displaying colors and so on and so forth? Like birds, for example, it's the male birds, right? The showiness, right? The show offness, if you will. That's why, in my view, drag is not at all feminine. It's hyper masculine, right? When you see a drag queen, full of color and all that, and just out there, that's like a male peacock, right? That's like a peacock, That's masculine. You know, so and also, drag queens are essentially, uh, RuPaul's Drag Race bears this out, Dragnificent bears this out, and so on. And in other cultures, there were certain elements of there were areas of society in which people of like, for instance, cross-dressing people or people of ambiguous gender or gender non-binary people and so forth. They were allocated to certain roles in society, like the hijras in India, for example. But my point being is that basically they're superheroes, right? They have secret identities and so on and so forth, and and all of that. So in my view, that's kind of where America is moving in terms of where we're finding our heroes, and how this sort of show off archetype is manifesting now, but we're still embracing it, right? Joe Exotic, right? Joe Exotic is not. Joe Exotic is like the love child of Donald Trump and Han Solo, right? It's Joe Exotic, and So anyway, so much to the point that Nicolas Cage is now going to play him in a movie, right? So anyway, so anyway, those are just some of my thoughts. Again, I'm not requiring anybody to watch this video, but maybe you'll watch it, maybe you won't. Maybe you'll be like, well, he's really off this time, or he's totally out there. But anyway, have a great week. Take care of yourselves. Please continue to social distance. I don't think that we've heard the last of COVID. Clearly we haven't, given the information that's coming out from reputable sources. Just be careful, be cautious, and be kind. All right, thanks.